two titans of the ancient world locked in a brutal struggle for dominance, Rome and Carthage. This was the setting for one of the most dramatic and bloody series of conflicts in history, the Punic Wars. Today, we'll dive into the Second Punic War, where one of the greatest military minds of all time would rise to fame, Hannibal Barca, the man who struck fear into the heart of Rome. The Punic Wars were a series of 3 wars fought between the emerging Roman Republic and the ancient city of Carthage, starting in 264 BC. These two powerful civilizations were rivals for control of the Mediterranean, and the stage was set for conflict. The First Punic War was a naval conflict fought mostly over Sicily. Though Carthage, a maritime superpower, dominated the seas, Rome, being a land power, adapted quickly, eventually forcing Carthage to sue for peace. Carthage was humiliated, and Rome took control of Sicily. But Carthage was far from finished. The Second Punic War, the most famous of the 3, began in 218 BC. Tensions boiled over when the city of Saguntum, allied with Rome, was besieged by Hannibal Barca, a rising Carthaginian general. Hannibal was born into a military family in 247 BCE. His father Hamilcar Barca was a general during the First Punic War. Legend has it that as a boy, Hannibal swore an oath to his father to always be an enemy of Rome. After Carthage's devastating defeat in the First Punic War, Hamilcar Barca, Hannibal's father, set out to restore Carthage's fortunes. Hamilcar had a bold vision to expand Carthaginian influence into the Iberian Peninsula, where untapped wealth and resources awaited. Without a proper navy, Hamilcar had no choice but to march his army across Numidia and cross the Strait of Gibraltar into what is now Spain. Over the next several years, he began the subjugation of the tribes of Hispania, laying the foundation for what would become Carthage's new power base. Hannibal was a young boy when his father embarked on the conquest of Hispania. He accompanied Hamilcar on these campaigns, learning the art of war firsthand from one of Carthage's most experienced generals. Under his father's guidance, Hannibal developed a deep hatred for Rome, a hatred that would define his life. But tragedy soon struck. During one of his campaigns, Hamilcar drowned in battle, leaving the command of the army in the hands of Hannibal's brother-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair. Hasdrubal continued Hamilcar's work, expanding Carthage's influence over Hispania and strengthening its foothold in the region. Hannibal, now a young officer, served under Hasdrubal, gaining experience and honing his skills as a commander. In 221 BC, Hasdrubal was assassinated, throwing the Carthaginian leadership into turmoil. At just 26 years old, Hannibal was proclaimed commander-in-chief by his soldiers. Hannibal, now in full command, wasted no time asserting his authority. His goal was clear: continue the work his father had begun and build a strong base in Hispania. But more than that, Hannibal wanted revenge. Over the next few years, Hannibal consolidated Carthaginian power in the region. He subdued local tribes, secured resources, and built a formidable army, all with one purpose in mind: to strike at the heart of Rome. The final spark for the Second Punic War came in 218 BC, when Hannibal laid siege to the city of Saguntum. Located in Hispania, but allied with Rome, the siege of Saguntum was a direct provocation. Rome sent envoys demanding that Hannibal cease his attack. Hannibal refused, Saguntum fell, and Rome declared war, but this was exactly what Hannibal wanted. He had spent years preparing his army for this moment, and now he would take the fight to Rome in a way they never expected. With the siege of Saguntum behind him and war now inevitable, Hannibal set his sights on an audacious plan to strike at Rome from an unexpected direction. While most armies would attack Italy from the south, Hannibal decided to lead his forces through the treacherous Alps, directly into the heart of the Roman Republic. The decision was both genius and madness. No one had ever attempted such a feat with an army this large. Yet Hannibal knew that this bold strategy would catch Rome completely off guard. In the autumn of 218 BC, Hannibal began his journey. His army, made up of roughly 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants, marched from Hispania and toward the looming mountains. As they passed through the Rhone Valley, Hannibal's army faced fierce resistance from hostile Gallic tribes. The Carthaginians had to fight their way through, battling local warriors while trying to keep their march on schedule. And then they reached the Alps. The towering mountains were a natural barrier that had protected Rome for centuries. The narrow paths were treacherous, and more than once, entire sections of the army were at risk of falling to their deaths. Avalanches and rockslides claimed the lives of many soldiers and pack animals. Men fell to frostbite, exhaustion, and hunger as the high altitude took its toll. Despite all this, Hannibal's leadership kept the army moving forward. His determination never wavered, and his men followed him with unwavering loyalty. After weeks of grueling hardship, Hannibal's forces finally descended from the mountains into Italy. They had crossed the Alps, something no one thought possible. But the cost had been high. Hannibal lost nearly half of his army to the harsh conditions and tribal attacks. Only about 26,000 soldiers and just a few elephants survived the crossing. Despite these losses, Hannibal had achieved the impossible. He had brought his army to the gates of Rome, and the Romans who believed the Alps were an impenetrable barrier were now facing an invasion from the north they never saw coming. The Roman Republic was thrown into chaos. News of Hannibal's miraculous crossing spread like wildfire. They dispatched Consul Publius Cornelius Scipio to intercept him. Hannibal's genius was on full display. As the two forces clashed near the Ticino River, the Carthaginian cavalry quickly enveloped the Roman horsemen. Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, the Roman cavalry began to break, while Scipio, caught off guard by the speed and ferocity of Hannibal's attack, struggled to regain control of the battlefield. In the midst of the fighting, Scipio himself was gravely wounded. As chaos erupted around him, the Roman consul narrowly escaped death, saved by his son, the future Scipio Africanus, who would one day face Hannibal again in a battle that would decide the fate of the war. Following his victory at the Ticino River, Hannibal marched his army south, his next target, the Trebia River, where he would lure the Roman forces into a trap. Meanwhile, the Roman Republic sent a new commander, Consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus, to bring his army back from Sicily to meet Scipio and face Hannibal. Hannibal knew that Sempronius will engage in an open battle. With this in mind, Hannibal devised a brilliant plan. He would provoke the Romans into a premature attack, and then ambush them when they were at their most vulnerable. Hannibal lured the Roman army into crossing the freezing Trebia River, leaving them cold and exhausted. By the time they reached the opposite bank, they were soaked, cold, and exhausted. As the Romans engaged Hannibal's forces, a hidden Carthaginian detachment led by Mago, Hannibal brother, ambushed them from behind, causing chaos and leading to a decisive Carthaginian victory. By the end of the day, the Roman army was shattered. Thousands of Roman soldiers were killed, while others fled in disarray. Sempronius barely escaped with his life. After the crushing victory at Trebia, Hannibal pressed further into Italy, drawing the Romans into yet another trap. In June 217 BC, he lured the Roman consul Gaius Flaminius into pursuing him along the shores of Lake Trasimene. As the Roman army marched along the misty lakeside, Hannibal's forces descended from the hills, cutting off their retreat and trapping them between the lake and the Carthaginian army. The ambush was devastating. Thousands of Romans were killed, drowned, or captured, and Flaminius himself perished in the chaos. Rome was shaken but not defeated. The Roman Senate, realizing the gravity of the situation, appointed a dictator, Quintus Fabius Maximus. Fabius avoided direct confrontation with Hannibal, hoping to wear him down through guerrilla tactics, yet many in Rome were frustrated by this cautious approach. In 216 BC, Rome decided to go on the offensive again. They gathered their largest army, over 90,000 soldiers, and marched to confront Hannibal at Cannae. The stage was set for a decisive confrontation, one that both sides believed would end the war. At Cannae, Hannibal faced the largest Roman army ever assembled, but once again, he turned Roman strength into weakness. Hannibal drew the Roman legions deep into his formation, exposing their flanks. Then, Hannibal's cavalry attacked from behind, and his forces closed in from all sides, trapping the Romans in a deadly circle. It was a complete annihilation. Over 50,000 Roman soldiers were killed in one of the bloodiest battles in history. Despite his incredible victory at Cannae, Hannibal faced a growing problem. The Roman heartland had been shaken, but not broken. Instead of surrendering, the Roman Republic began to rebuild its armies and adopted a strategy of attrition. While Hannibal continued to win battles, he could not capture Rome or force the city into submission. The Romans now avoided direct engagement with Hannibal and focused on weakening his forces through skirmishes and cutting off his supplies. For over a decade, Hannibal remained in Italy, fighting a war of attrition. His army, now cut off from reinforcements and supplies from Carthage, was growing weaker with each passing year. Hannibal's dream of bringing Rome to its knees seemed to be slipping away. While Hannibal remained in Italy, a new Roman commander, Scipio Africanus, struck at the heart of Carthage. His campaign in North Africa threatened the city itself, forcing Carthage to recall Hannibal from Italy in 203 BC. After nearly 15 years in Italy, Hannibal was forced to leave the land he had fought so hard to conquer. His campaign had pushed Rome to the brink, but now the survival of Carthage rested on the outcome of a final battle on home soil. In 202 BC, Hannibal faced Scipio Africanus at the Battle of Zama. Scipio, having studied Hannibal's tactics, was ready. He used his cavalry to outflank Hannibal's forces and neutralize the war elephants that had once been so effective. Hannibal's army, no longer the invincible force it had once been, was decisively defeated. The Battle of Zama marked the end of the Second Punic War. Carthage was forced to sue for peace, and Rome emerged as the dominant power in the Mediterranean. Hannibal's defeat at Zama marked the end of Carthage's ambitions and the beginning of Rome's dominance, and resulted in a loss of respect for Hannibal by his fellow Carthaginians. Scipio Africanus, the one name that could stand against Hannibal's unstoppable wrath, and emerged as the savior of Rome. Once a young boy who escaped the chaos of battle with his father, now stood as the last line of defense against the greatest military genius the ancient world had ever seen. With Hannibal's defeat at Zama in 202 BC, the Second Punic War was over. Carthage, once the mighty rival of Rome, was forced to negotiate peace. The terms were harsh. Carthage was stripped of its overseas territories, its navy was reduced to a mere shadow, and it was burdened with a crippling war indemnity. Carthage would never challenge Rome again. Following the defeat at Zama, Hannibal was forced into exile. The man who had once brought the Roman Republic to the edge of collapse now spent his years wandering foreign courts, offering his military expertise to distant kings. In 183 BC, after years of evading capture, Hannibal made the ultimate decision. Rather than fall into the hands of his lifelong enemies, he took his own life, ending his legend on his own terms. With the fall of Carthage, Rome's dominance grew unchecked. Now the uncontested power in the Mediterranean began its march towards empire. In 146 BCE, after decades of tension, Rome launched the Third Punic War. This time, they sought not to defeat Carthage, but to erase it from history. The final destruction of Carthage was brutal and complete. The once great city was burned to the ground, its people enslaved, and its lands salted to ensure nothing would grow again. Carthage was wiped from the map, and Rome stood as the unchallenged master of the Mediterranean world.